Good afternoon or morning or evening whenever you're listening to this. I have introduced this particular lecture, which I hope doesn't go on too long. I'll try to keep it to about 20 minutes, to this iteration of the course this time, because I found that I think that we need to talk more about interpersonal communication and some basic issues that come up in the workplace and relationships as well, but mostly this will have to do with the workplace. This will go along with some of the links and other reading material in this particular module, number 5, and some of it will be represented on the exam, so be aware of that. When I talk about granular communication, I mean getting down to the very words, the individual words and phrases that we use every day. And sometimes changing a phrase can make a big difference in how we are heard and what people hear. And in this, it gets into the idea of framing as well, which will be an important topic in this lecture. We can talk about it in terms of us as a sender and us as a receiver, although we have to keep in mind that in an interactive model of communication, you're really doing both roles at the same time. You may be the one who is primarily talking and sending, but you're even if you're receiving, you're sending out nonverbal signals and things like that. So you're really doing both at the same time. So let's talk first about as a sender. And some of this will seem a little preachy or a little maybe off topic, but I just encourage you to bear with me. The first one is, I'm going to talk about a term called microaggressions. And I bring this up because microaggressions, although it's a controversial term for some people, they do exist. But I think the problem with it is the word aggressive or aggression seems to infer or imply, rather, some sort of intentional desire to hurt somebody. And that's usually not the case. That these microaggressions or perhaps awkward things we would say that might hurt people because of their background, because of their health, their culture, or whatever, the person usually doesn't intend it. They just don't know to say something in a better way, in a more granular fashion. So I don't want to give the impression that you're a bad person if you use some of these phrases. Sometimes people are bad people when they say things, but generally they're saying them out of, they just haven't had maybe some of the training or shown that there's a better way to say things. So, I just want to start with that. But you do need to be careful in the workplace today. We have a more diverse workforce, and people are more aware of diversity and their own diversity. And that's a good thing. Diversity brings us solutions. It's not just something that has to be done to fulfill some sort of quota or legal requirement. Diversity allows us to look at problems and solutions from different ways and to include people. So, that's the idea here. And I'm going to give a bad example from my own life where I probably did a microaggression, and it was entirely unintentional, but as soon as it came out of my mouth, oh my word. I had a student who had a preferred pronoun and preferred gender and name, but it was different than the name that I saw on the roll first. So as much as I tried to call this student by the preferred name and gender, one day I was putting folks in groups, and I said, "You 3 ladies," and then as soon as it came out of my mouth, I knew that I had blown it because I was going back to the first name that was on the roster that I saw and not the preferred name. So I felt really bad about that, but I didn't know how to really apologize for it. So I just kept going and didn't say anything. And the student did not come back, but I think that the class, but uh, I was not the only professor in this situation. So I don't know if it was, I don't think it was my fault, but it still is, it's bothered me since then. So I've been much, much more careful. Not intentional, it just slipped out, and I need little retraining on that. So I'm being transparent here, which we're going to get into a little bit later when we talk about self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is good if there's a relevance to it. Some of our self-disclosure is not relevant, and that's the second word that we need to talk about is relevance to all situations, but especially in the workforce. There just are some things that are not relevant in the workplace. That's not to say we shouldn't have any sort of interpersonal friendships or relationships in the workforce. Of course not, but there are boundaries of how much. And I think a lot of us can think of situations where we were in had coworkers who did not have the right kind of boundaries in their relationships. We could probably have a good discussion on that. Okay, the next word there is framing, and I'll let you click on that video and watch it. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long, and I thought it was very good. They're Australian, I think, but they do a really good job of explaining what is meant here by framing. Framing is used sociologically and in media studies, but here it's just a way of contextualizing a situation so that it's more from the perspective not just of the one person, but it's a perspective of a broader frame. And think of just looking at a window. And if it were a larger window, you're going to see things. If you move the frame of the camera, you're going to see different things. So that's the idea. Gender language, of course, we get into roles and pronouns. Now, roles are, and I think most people know this, that we don't say things like fireman anymore or policeman anymore, although sometimes that happens. You know, it is police officers, it is firefighters, etc. So those should have gone away. People still say things like female doctor, which to me is a gynecologist, not a woman who is a doctor, or male nurse, which it slays me when I hear that. But, being careful about roles and stereotypes or any types of things that would make conclusions about people based on their presenting gender and or their sex, and not seeing them as people, which is the biggest thing. We don't want to totalize, which is only seeing people as one thing. We want to see them as complete people, as more than just one thing. Pronouns, again, I've noticed in higher ed, almost everyone is putting their pronouns, people who have jobs, putting their preferred pronouns. I don't know that that is something that you're going to see in the workforce as much, in the private or the business workforce, for different reasons. So that would be something that would be an organizational issue of whether that is something they want you to do. Keep in mind that any media that you're using at the workplace belongs to them. It does not belong to you. So they have a right to expect certain kinds of rules and behaviors on their media that they're paying for, or their correspondence, or their methods of communication. So if they say they don't want those pronouns, preferred pronouns, then you don't really have, a case. It's their stuff. So that's and there's other things. It's like the way you might sign your signature, or back in the day when email started, people used to put all these beautiful pictures on their email, these backgrounds. That's gone out of fashion, thankfully, because it's distracting. But the company, the organization owns the system, the computers, so they have a right to basically police, if you want to use that word, what's there. Then we get into you attitude, and we talked about this a little bit in the first unit. And this is very important in business communication, that you do not cast blame, especially unnecessarily, but that you focus on solutions. So the framework is, if you do this, then we will be able to do this to give you what you want, to meet your goals, to serve you. As opposed to, well, you didn't do X, so this is the consequence. So this is what's going to happen. Okay, you did not pay your bill, therefore your cable was turned off. Well, obviously the person should have paid their bill, but that doesn't solve the problem, and you've lost a customer. Don't you want the customer back? If you pay your bill with a service charge, by X day we will reinstall your cable. Okay, that's a simple example, but the emphasis is on what they can do to solve the problem, not blaming them for how they got in the situation, because nobody wants to hear that. Okay, we already know it, and it's just like a school marm. You don't want to do it. And generally, I would say that our communication would be a whole lot better if we would just take a break from stressors, and sometimes take a break from electronics. Face-to-face is the best communication mode if you can do it. We've all gotten too Zoomized in the pandemic. I went to a state meeting in March. It was so lovely to be around my colleagues and see people and sit at a table and have conversations with no screens in front of us. It was great, and I look forward to that. Also, as a sender, and looking at the language you use in a granular way, you want to think about I language. Express your opinions as opinions, not as facts. I've gotten into discussions with my students about saying I feel versus I believe. I personally think that it's better to say I think or I believe, stating it as your opinion. I feel puts it in the realm of emotion, which sometimes that's not what you want to do. Some people disagree with me, and that's fine. But it's something to think about. And the whole point is, how are you expressing your opinions? Are you expressing them as facts when they're not facts? Fast and Furious are stupid movies. Well, obviously you may not like them, but they're very popular, so you're not the only person with an opinion. So express your opinions as just that, not as facts. I don't enjoy the Fast and Furious movies. Fine, that is an opinion. It's a fact that you don't enjoy them, but it's not the same as saying they're stupid or they're bad movies or whatever. It's always best to take a positive versus a negative approach. This goes back to the framing and the meeting the mutual goals. We again, just like avoiding the stressors and taking breaks, we would do better to be positive. That doesn't always mean to be nice, and it doesn't also mean to use the criticism sandwich. I have a link there in some of the reading materials about, they refer to it as the crap sandwich, and it's pretty much a cliche now, although it's still used. It's sort of like people are asking questions, what are your strengths and weaknesses in an interview? Kind of pointless. So, again, focus on the solution, not the people. That is the core. One good article I read recently says that when you go to someone and you really kind of need to deal with a problem, that you don't go to them in a critical way, or this is what you did wrong, but you say, I need you to help me. Okay? So, and you see how that I need you to help me, because what that does, it puts you on an equal or maybe even a little bit lower and it's disarming at first, and it makes the person, be more willing to listen. And then they're going to be open, and they're going to say, oh, okay, that is something that I should, I can do something and I should do something about, as opposed to blaming them. I always tell my students, go to your bosses, go to your supervisors with solutions, not problems. And this has been my mantra in my career. Don't go with and whining and something is wrong. go with a solution. It may not be the best solution, but go with a solution. It shows that you're being proactive. Finally, we get to this idea of apologizing. And apologizing is important, but it's often overdone. And I could show you some videos about how women tend to say, I'm sorry too much for no reason. You've probably seen these on YouTube. And apologizing reflexively or just doing it because it's something to do is pointless. Apologies need to be meaningful. You need to be careful about how, especially if you're in customer service or dealing with management in that kind of an area, that you follow a script that your company wants you to follow where it doesn't come across that you're taking blame. A lot of times when we apologize, it's basically, oh yeah, well, we're sorry that happened, and we almost take the blame, and you don't want to do that because that could make you liable for something. So you want to focus on fixing the problem, not taking the blame. And you can empathize with the person by saying, oh, that must be difficult, but you don't want to go too far into the emotion and the sorry and the apologizing because, number one, it doesn't really solve the problem, which is what you want to do, and it could be a liability. So be careful about that. Usually companies have scripts or ways they want you to say these things so that it doesn't come across as an acceptance of blame. Then we come into as a receiver, and really, again, we're both, but in listening. Listening is so important, and there's a link for you to listen to or to read there. We want to use active listening where we're paraphrasing. Now, that's not the same as repeating. In paraphrasing and active listening, we are affirming that we heard and understand their message by putting it in our own words, not just repeating exactly what they just said. That's a little ignorant. We want to avoid immediate advice. That is so common. This is what you got to do. Well, we've all been in that situation where somebody thought they had the solution for our problems and we felt dismissed. We did not feel listened to. They didn't ask the right questions. They didn't really listen to us. And then the last one is to watch about avoiding false comparisons or similar experiences. Oh, honey, I know that happened to me, or I know somebody that happened to. Oh, yeah, that's so common. It happens to everybody. Well, that doesn't help. Avoid false comparisons and immediately jumping to, oh, yeah, I know all about that because. That's not helpful. Now, this would be taken to another level when you're dealing with conflict situations or highly charged emotional situations or grief situations. There's a whole way to listen in those situations. I would recommend the link there to the empathy video, very short 3-minute video by Brene Brown. I'm not a total Brene Brown fan, but she's got some good stuff, good material about leadership and empathy and vulnerability, some good things to listen to. So that's a helpful one, and it's very much about the granular. It's important when, as a receiver, to ask questions, but like anything, it can be overdone. You want to keep the questions relevant. You don't want them to get too personal. You don't want it to be where you're interrogating people rather than listening to them. You don't want them to feel like they're being cross-examined. So there's a sensitivity to that. Questions are good, but like everything, they have their limits. And then we get into the subject of self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is something that should be reciprocal and an equal amount and depth. And some of us are somewhat reluctant to self-disclose. I tend to be on that one because maybe I don't want people in my business. And other people self-disclose everything, and you may know people like this. That's difficult. I have a couple slides here from my interpersonal communication class, which I love to teach, but I don't get a chance to very much. I think I've only done it 3 times. And self-disclosure has many benefits for the person disclosing and for the other person. And it's enhancement of relationships. It's trust, because we're saying, I trust you with this information. When we self-disclose, the other person feels able to self-disclose as well, so there's a reciprocity. It's an emotional release, and it can help other people because they feel that they can reciprocate, and also they know more about you. They feel that trust, and there may be something you say of your own experience that can help them. There are risks, however. Anytime you self-disclose, there can be rejection. The other person just sort of doesn't know what to do with it, or is not a good listener themselves and does not take it well. Sometimes self-disclosure may make the other person feel like they have to self-disclose, and they're not really ready to do it. They're not ready to reciprocate. It's possible that we may say something in self-disclosure that is inappropriate or too much, and other people may feel that their privacy is being violated because they're being expected to do it. So self-disclosure is one of those things you have to be very sensitive about. You want to do it at the same level. There's wide self-disclosure where you talk about a lot of things in your life, like your hobbies and your family, and people know a lot about you. But then there's deep self-disclosure where you get into emotional, a lot of things in your background. Probably at work, you want to be more on the broad, so people know something about you and they feel comfortable around you, as opposed to the deep. That's something you want to do in your faith community, with your support groups, with your family, with your therapist, and deep friends. It's not always going to be something that you want to do unless you become deep friends with someone at work, which can or cannot be a good thing. As a listener and receiver, it's very important to keep track of our nonverbal cues, and the biggest one that everybody talks about now is your devices. Hide the devices. Get them off the table. We all know this, and they still are out there. It's sort of like texting when we drive. We all know it's evil, and we still have the phones out and text them when we drive. Put them away. We've got to get conquering over this. Posture and eye contact are the two nonverbal cues, along with smiling, of course, and having a positive affect that will help you as listening and encourage the other person to talk and share and give more information. Anything you do, such as standing up, turning away, looking at your phone, looking at a book, doing something else, will cause people to feel unlistened to. Interrupting is something that some folks do just out of habit. They won't let other people finish their sentences. They think they're helping them out, I guess, or they get so excited they have to just jump in. It is so rude. It is so ineffective. If you have a tendency with that, and it's ever pointed out to you, you need to listen up. You need to be very sincere about that, because it is one of the worst things. The next worst thing is planning, which we all do. Instead of hearing what the other person's saying, we're planning our next speech. We're not hearing them. And finally, monopolizing. And this is when someone gets too much into the weeds, and they don't talk for a long time, maybe in a meeting, and then when it's their time, they go on for 5 minutes. I've noticed this happening. The person who sits back lets everybody talk for 20 minutes, and now they're going to orate. They're going to give their speech. Not productive, because by then, the group is not going to remember everything they've been through, and they've moved on. You need to jump in when it's time. Don't store it up and then give it away. So another thing about that is state your point, support it, and move on. That's deductive method. A lot of people, they have a more inductive method. They want to tell the whole story of the past and everything else and give all the details and then draw the conclusion. You will lose people that way. Make your point, then support it, kind of repeat yourself at the end, and that's it, as opposed to the other ways. Okay, I want to bring this to a close. Learning productive interpersonal communication skills is a lifelong quest. I'm pretty old and I'm still doing it. It's not always about being nice or polite, although some of that will go a long way. You should be. But I prefer the words kindness and humanity to just being nice, because we all know there's some people who are kind of fakey nice or fakey polite. Just like the Southern bless his heart, that doesn't really mean that you're asking God to bless them. And it's also about effectiveness, empathy, and strategy, knowing how others will hear it. And that's what the granular communication is all about.